welcome to this week's episode of Opera Maine. I'm your host, Robert Mellon. This week, my guest is lighting designer Chris Akerlind, who has had an illustrious career that has included 2 Tony Awards for his productions of Light in the Piazza and Indecent, where he won for Best Lighting Design, and an Obie Award for sustained excellence in his work off-Broadway. Chris is a Portland, Maine resident who has had quite a career in the opera world as well, working at such companies as the Metropolitan Opera, Washington National Opera, Houston Grand Opera, San Francisco Opera, and for over 25 years he has been a resident lighting designer at Opera Theater of St. Louis. For Opera Maine, Chris was the lighting designer for the 2013 production of La Boheme, the 2015 production of Tosca, where he was also the spatial designer as well. And in 2018, he did not only the lighting design, but also the set design for Le Nozze di Figaro. In today's episode, we talk about Chris's beginnings. We then speak about what it's like to be in the mind of a lighting designer from day one to opening night. And at the end, we may get a glimpse as to what it's like to win a Tony Award. You're not going to want to miss this one, so do enjoy. All right, Chris Akerlind, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so happy to have you. Let's start off with a how it all began question. So where did you find yourself getting into lighting design, set design, theater work in general?
Well, it's funny. It goes back to when I was a kid. I made a lot of puppets. I was a magician. I was a musician. I played all the woodwinds except for the double reeds, and I ended up a pretty good tenor sax player. And I like jazz, and so improvisation is actually some of I drag some of those skills with me into my work as a lighting designer. But it was really after my first year at college. I did a wonderful internship at Hartford Stage, a year-long internship. I had no idea. I had understood that people organized the lights, the costumes, the scenery, etc. But I had no idea the process that was involved in it. And though I had started as a general production intern, I gravitated towards the lighting, or how we refer to it as the electrics department. But at Hartford Stage I was 19 years old, and it was 1981, and there were a group of people there, led by artistic director Mark Lamos, who works quite a bit in opera as well as theater. John Conklin, who at that time was primarily a theatrical set designer, who of course became you might say the dean of opera set designers, and Pat Collins, who actually straddles both worlds. Pat Collins, the lighting designer, who straddles both worlds as a set and lighting designer. And I listening to them talk about the work and the play, the play or they were all plays at that time, but just talking about the dramaturgical or the dramatic logic for what they were doing, that it wasn't just making pretty, that design actually had a structural supportive role. And I was hooked. And so I went then to finish school. I had done a year of college at that point. I went on to finish a bachelor's degree at Boston University in theater lighting design, design in general. Then I took a year off, moved back to Hartford, where they graciously took me on as a paid staff member, which meant that I could start to make a little dent in my student loans. And then somebody there, I met Jim Ingalls, I think, Robert Wiersel, 2 other, well-known lighting designers in the world of opera. Just suggested that I apply to graduate school. So being not of the most confident sort, I applied to a huge range. Every place from the University of Connecticut, where I was, living at the time, to the Yale School of Drama on a whim, and I got into the latter, and went there for 3 years as a lighting design student, studying with Jennifer Tipton, who's very well known as a lighting designer in the world of dance, theater, and opera, but dance in particular. And really never looked back.
What is the process for a lighting designer from day one when you get assigned to the show all the way until those last few days before the show opens? What's your process in creating that design?
Of all the 600 some odd productions I've done, there's always been a kind of interesting ratio of where do my instincts take over, as opposed to where do I bump up against and jive with a director's instincts. So I like to find the nugget of inspiration, and then I'm usually presented with a set design, and I tend to work with designers, if I'm not working with myself, which I will do occasionally, but I'm primarily a lighting designer. Is I work with set designers who like to work in models as opposed to sketches. And the reason I like a model is that it's, for me in my imagination, it's a more blank canvas. Sketches have atmosphere, but in a model, it's an untreated. You see the composition, the structure, all the compositional attributes, of it, and then you can, because it has no light. Sometimes set designers will light a model, like just doing things that we often can't do in the theater, which is like just put one light stage left, and in the model box, and turn it on. But so it's a as I say, it's a blanker canvas for my imagination. But again, over 600 productions, I've done it's run a huge gamut of what I'm presented with. Now, then there are certain then the ground plan and the physical space, the dimensional space that the set occupies, leave spaces. Sometimes they don't, but leave spaces for lighting. They're not thinking about that, but we light in the theater mostly from overhead, which is one of the reasons why I like to light from below, because it feels unique. And it also feels intrinsic to theater. Theater before, it's only been 100 years that we've lit things from overhead. Before that, everything was from footlights. And so there's a sort of sense of tradition or ritual about that. And then actually the thought that the theater, opera, dance ultimately goes back to the idea of telling a story around a campfire where the light is like a footlight. So there's something intrinsic about it, about footlights, that I like. My technique is to make a list of the brushstrokes or the tools that I feel like I need to achieve what has been discussed, uh, uh, what has been imagined in my head, but also what's been discussed between my collaborators. Then you take the list, and my lists tend to be fairly poetic. Like I will try to find a dramatic or poetic expression or word to use to contextualize the idea, when it might just be a light from stage left that's at 6 foot high. And then you much like an engineer or an architect, and then you have to figure out the nuts and bolts. Like, well, for instance, if I want a light here, and that poses a kind of maybe engineering or structural problem, I have to get on the phone with the technical people. I've done projects with as few as 2 lights, and I've done projects with as many as 1,400. But so then you assemble that into a drawing or a series of drawings, which we call the light plot. And that's the drawing that I hand to the electric staff, who is usually headed by the master electrician. And she or he figures out, then does all the mechanical planning about how to get me my lights, how to get me the lights or the gestures or the ideas where I need them. And then the next process is to go to see the thing in rehearsal. I'll arrive in, say, San Francisco, and go to the theater opera house or wherever the rehearsal is. And then right at the end of the rehearsal process, where the director has been working with the singers or the actors or the dancers, and sometimes all three, and they do what is called a rehearsal room run. And I like that so much because it's just unadorned in a great way. It's people with their mouths open, with beautiful words or music, or they're using their bodies in a way with no adornment whatsoever. And there's something in that moment that I feel is what theater can be, less adorned. And it's a kind of, it's what I call the rehearsal room aesthetic that I like to think is in the back of my mind, informing much of what I do vis-a-vis keeping things simple. So then I see the piece. The director and I might chit chat about where something that we had planned isn't working out. Lighting designers are then asked to make huge amounts of work in very little time. So then we focus the lights. Now these days there are lots of fancy computerized moving lights, which you focus as part of the lighting. But then there are a lot of fixed units that still need to be focused. And that means that there's an electrician on the top of a ladder or on a catwalk or hanging out on a front of house position, the box booms or what have you, pointing the light at my direction, and then shaping it, cohering it, softening it, keeping it sharp. And it's a real painstaking process. And it takes, for a big show, it can take 2 days. I think for some of the work that you and I have done together, it's, maybe 2/3 of a day, 6 hours, something like that. And then, so once the focus is done, you take a deep breath, and the next thing you know, you're lighting the show. So, in the opera world, there are lighting rehearsals. You add the costumes, and in the theater, we tech with costumes. In opera, you typically tech and then have a dress rehearsal where costumes are added. And I can't tell you in opera how much of a relief it is to have costumes come, because before you're lighting singers, for instance, who are just coming in their street clothes, which you can't control, and they are, generally speaking, never a designed group. So the light is falling across lots of different patterns and colors and shades, and that can make your mind go wild, because nothing is, the kind of great instincts of a costume designer in terms of keeping things designed hasn't arrived yet. And as soon as they arrive, suddenly all the problems that I might have thought I had with certain scenes, it all falls away because you can see the whole thing. That really sums up the process. And then you've got opening night, and I'm either there to celebrate, or not, but I always celebrate the idea that this group of people, a community of artists, have made something that moves people.
In 2018, you not only did the lighting design for Opera Maine's production of Nozze di Figaro, but you also did the set design.
Yep.
Now, from the beginning, when you start designing the set, are you also thinking about the lights at the same time, or is it a two-part process?
I think because of the way that because being a lighting designer, there's no way that I can turn that off. It's like a programmed, it's what I do. So I would say that production, which I thought was visually was very successful. And again, because I think that Donna Vaughn and I were thinking really simply, I think the piece, the Marriage of Figaro, it's so full of the most, well, first of all, glorious music, and second of all, the characters and the interaction of this society in that house. It's the Marriage of Figaro is one of the best things in the world. So we knew that we wanted to do something simple, and that's interesting with Figaro, because it has farce-like elements, and so it needs doors and windows, and so we had a couple of simple freestanding doors. We knew we wanted to just do it on a floor or something that felt like a platform with a drop behind. Really elemental theater, much like Mozart would have experienced. He would have had wings and borders, and a backdrop. We had black wings, and then a the backdrop, which seemed to describe the manor house in England, where Donna had wanted to transport the action. There's something very satisfying about creating just a simple void of light that has character, without being more splashy than that. And so again, I was thinking, well, platform, background. We also knew that for the fourth act, for the garden, that we were going to fly the drops out, and that there would just be a couple oddball topiary-like structures, which I think was with a new bigger drop to imply the air of being, and the air, and also slightly the craziness of being outside. That fourth act is so wonderfully nutty. But the thorny problem was getting Carabino out the window. And so I proposed cutting a slit in the I think that particular drop showed a rear view of the house, looking over what you would imagine were the gardens in the back of the house. We just cut a slit, and when it was time for her to leave, she just jumped through the slit. And on opening night, I was so pleased, but there was great affection shown the idea by the audience. And again, if we had to have, a big structural window, I think it's just more stuff, and I want to de-stuff theater production. So I aim for the idea of grandiosity in emotion, and that choice about Carabino leaving through the slits allowed us not to have to drag on a window.
Something pretty impressive, having won 2 Tony Awards for the productions of Indecent and A Light in the Piazza. How does that affect how you approach your job after you've won awards like that? Or maybe it doesn't affect you at all?
There's a little ego boost. It felt good. And so winning the Tony just felt like a little bit of a little icing on the cake. I'm forgetting what it was, but somehow I made inroads into the commercial theater, and the commercial theater which is where you win Tonys. Broadway. I had an early break on Broadway coming out of school. I did 2 August Wilson plays, the premieres, which went to Broadway, The Piano Lesson and 7 Guitars, for which I received my first Tony nomination in 1996. The best thing about it is that it kept me in that world. Now, I haven't taken every Broadway show I've been offered, because I don't want to become a creature primarily of the Broadway theater, the commercial theater. For instance, I would inadvertently, if I became that creature, I would have to give up my foothold in opera. So I've done a good job, I think, at over 30 years of given that I have entree into Broadway now, and people hire me because I've got 2 Tonys. I like to keep it balanced out. So in a weird way, winning the Tonys has allowed me to have this idea about keeping a balance.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and chatting with us a little bit. Having had the opportunity to work with you not only in Maine, but also with Opera Theater of St. Louis, I mean, your work is out of this world. And I am just so honored to have had the opportunity to sit down and chat with you a little bit.
Well, likewise, Bobby, you're really terrific. And I can't wait till the next time we can actually shake hands.
I agree.
All right.
See you soon.
Cheers.
Bye. And that'll do it for this week. I hope you enjoyed, and don't forget to tune in next week when we have international opera star and Mainer Kate Aldrich on the program. If you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to us and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Opera Maine. Until next week, I'll see you when I see you.